Okay, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Avodah Zara Daf Nun Beis. We are starting the last of the short lines, and we're in the midst of a discussion between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. As we saw in the Mishnah on Nun Aleph Amud Beis, there was a whole diyun around when an item becomes actual Avodah Zara. Is it when the item was put together or when the item is served? This is subject to a machlokas Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. Today, we're going to be spending some time analyzing the sheet of Rabbi Akiva, and we'll be flip-flopping in regards to drashas and shakla v'tarya to understand how each of these shitas got to where they are. Again, last of the short lines, about a third of the way down on Nun Beis Amud Aleph. Rabbi Akiva says the Gemara, Avodas kochav shel oved kochav desir miyad minale. Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion that an oved kochav who builds an avodah zara, that avodah zara becomes aser instantaneously, even prior to the goy serving the avodah zara. It's just aser because you made it. So says the Gemara, how does he know this? Amar Ula, first of the long lines, Amar Krop, Silei Elohehem Tisrafun Beish, Misha Paslo, Nase Eloha. From the time that it was carved out, from the time that it was made into a pasel, okay, say there, so then it's considered to be their deity. Rabbi Shmuel, what do you do with that pasuk? Sounds like a good raya from Rabbi Akiva that it becomes pasal miyat. So says the Gemara, no, that pasuk of Silei Elohehem Tisrafun Beish, Humi Baile Lichadatani Rabbi Yosef. He uses that pasuk for the sheet of Rabbi Yosef, the Tana Rabbi Yosef, when posel Eloho. How do we know that one can be posel his God, that he can be posel? It says Gemara Shenemar Psileo Elohim Tisrafun Beish. So there we don't have a problem because that pasuk is going to be used for something else. Then the Gemara says, "V'idach Rabbi Akiva." What about that idea? Says the Gemara, the idea that Rabbi Yosef set a lineup. Nafkalei Midish Shmuel. He learned it from Shmuel. The Shmuel Rami Ksiv. He learned this out from two conflicting psukim. One pasuk says Lo Sachmod Kesef is a Lehem, and then another pasuk says One says don't desire their avodah zara, and the other one says you can take it. Okay, son. How do we have it? So says the Gemara Pisalo leEloha. If says the Gemara, if he carved something out for his God, then we say Lo Sachmod. However, Psalo may Eloha, if he is Mavatel, his deity, so then V'lokach Talach, then it's acceptable for you to use this. All of this is part one of Rabbi Akiva, which was that Rabbi Akiva held that an avodas kochavim who builds, an oved kochavim who builds an avodas kochavim, it's asur miyad. Then the Gemara says halfway down, 7 lines into the wide lines, Rabbi Akiva, Ashkechan avodas kochavim shel oved kochavim de asur miyad. You've explained your case. You brought the pasuk of Silei Elohehem Tisrafun Beish. Rabbi Akiva proves his shita that avodas kochavim, that a pesel that's made by an oved kochavim becomes aser immediately. To Israel ad shete aved. What if a Jew were to make a pesel? God forbid. So let's say he knows what he's doing. He made a pesel, but it was never served. Yeah, why does Rabbi Akiva bifurcate these two? Rabbi Akiva says that if a goy makes an avodas kochavim, it becomes pasal miyad. But if a yid makes an avodas kochavim, it doesn't become pasal miyad. It only becomes pasal after he serves it. It says the Gemara Minal, and how do we know that this is true? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Kra, v'sam basaser. When he serves something in private, ad sheyaseh lo dvarim shebasaser. Only if you were to serve that item in private, or really just serve that item, it's just the derech of the Jew that if he is going to do avodah zarah, they don't usually do it so brazenly. So that's what the Gemara says is the Mar Makom, that for Yisrael, we see from the pasuk of Asam Basalser that only after a yid worships the idol that he made does it become aser. But if a Yisrael just made the pesel and never served it, let's say he's just in the sales business, he only sells pesel, he only sells them, so then the halacha is that it would not yet be avodah zarah. Let's say that somebody sells, you have an Israeli guy, like sometimes you go up to Wisconsin Dells, a bunch of Israelis are their own stores. So let's say that they make these deities. Maybe they're not yet from, so they're making all of these psalm, they're making all of these idols. But they made them. They didn't serve them. It's not yet avodah zarah. Once the goy buys it and once the goy serves it, so then now you're talking. That's the real deal of avodah zarah. What about that pasuk of a son basaser? Seems to be that Rabbi Akiva has a good marimakum to teach us that by Yisrael it doesn't become avodah zarah until it's served. Halfway down, the Gemara says, "V'idach Rabbi Shmuel explains when we Rabbi Yitzchak, the pasuk of a son basaser is used for another context. How do we know that the idol that belongs to a Jew that it needs to be buried, that there is no bittul? A Jew cannot nullify avodah zarah, even if he owns it, he can't nullify it. Shenamar v'sam basaser. He uses that pasuk, the one that Rabbi Akiva used to say that if a Jew makes avodah zarah, it wouldn't be usher until he serves it. Rabbi Shmuel learns that that there's no bittul. Same pasuk. V'idach Rabbi Akiva. Where do you learn that avodas kochavim shel Yisrael are tu'unin geniza? That how do you know that if it were to be that of a yid, that a yid owned a pesel, that there's no such thing as bittul? We are 2/3 of the way down on Nun Beis Amud Aleph, about 12 lines into the wide lines. What does Rabbi Akiva hold? Dam Rav Chizda Amar Rab, Minayin lavodas kochavim shel Yisrael shetunin geniza. How do we know that a pesel that belonged to a yid can never be batel, needs to be buried? You can never get rid of the status. Zog the Gemara based on a pasuk. Shneimar lo sita locha asherah kol eitz eitzel mizbach. Ma mizbach ta'on geniza, af asherah ta'on geniza. It's nice when the psukim are from your bar mitzvah parsha. You actually have some familiarity with how to read them. So the Gemara over here says that what do we see from this drasha? Lo sitalacha ashera kol eitz eitzel mizbach. So we make a drasha. Ma mizbach ta'on geniza, ma mizbech ta'on geniza. That if there was something wrong with the mizbech, so af ashera ta'on geniza. If there was something that was made into an avodah zarah, such as the equivalent of an ashera, so then the halacha is that it's ta'on geniza. Re'idach. Rabbi Yishmael, what do you do with the pasuk of lo sitalacha? So says the Gemara, no. The pasuk of lo sitalacha is a pasuk that he's going to use for another reason. And this we're kind of extrapolating from the world of Mizbech to the world of Dayanim. Look at this then. Let's say that the community hires a Dayan, and Rachmana litzlan, the Dayan that they hire at the CRC, at the Aguda, wherever they hire the Dayan, he's not Ru'uya Lakach, he's not Hagun. They picked the wrong guy. He's not Yashar, whatever the problem is. Kilu notea Ashera Yisrael. It's as if you planted an Ashera tree in Eretz Yisrael. Shenemar Shofatim v'Shotrim Titen Lecha B'Chol Sha'arecha, that you should appoint judges and shotrim officers at all of your gates. V'Samech Le, and the pasuk says soon after, right as the parsha opens, Lo Sita Lecha Ashera, Lo Sita Lecha Ashera Kol Eitz. So we see that there's a smichus parshios between establishing a shofet, a dayan, and an ashera. So don't mess around. If you're on the board of the CRC and you're hiring, and you make sure that the people that you're hiring to be dayanim are the right kind of people. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niheh b'dvaro. And then one last piece to this dayanos is that Amar Rav Ashi, if you make this error of hiring a dayan she'eno hagun in the presence of Talmidei Chachamim, kilu netao etzel mizbeach. Not only is it like planting an Asherah, but it's like planting an Asherah in the Beis HaMikdash. This is like the efforts of some of our enemies who brought Avodah Zara into the Makam HaMikdash. Make sure when you're hiring Dayanim that they are the right profile. They have to, of course, be Talmidei Chachamim Matzumim Miflan. They have to know Kimat Every Shach and Taz. When I was in Smicha, Reversal Shechter used to say this all the time. If you want to be a Rav, you need to know every Shach, you need to know every Taz. You have to know how to paskin shailas. If you're going to be a posek, you have to know every shach and every taz. Don't stop learning. And he used to say, it's just one bookcase. It's just one bookcase of svarim that you need to know. It's not so bad. Maybe it's not so bad for him. It was pretty bad for the rest of us. He had to know all of Shulchan Aruch, all Tur Beis Yosef Shulchan Aruch. It's an unbelievable amount of Torah. Okay, anyways, that's what the Gemara says. Shenamar Eitzel Mizbach. So the Gemara there was teaching us this idea that when you hire a dayan, it has to be done correctly. And therefore, that was how Rabbi Shmuel learned the pasuk of Lo Sitalacha Asherah Kol Eitz, and therefore it's not a stira. On the end of sugya, we now see how the various approaches and opinions of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva are darshaned in the psukim. Now the Gemara is going to ask a couple of questions. Let us continue. Boy Rav Hamnuna, Riseich Kli. If you repaired a Kli, Rashi over here says, Rashi's 1/3 of the way down, Riseich Kli. Rashi says, Kli shenishbar, it broke, v'haki shalav b'kornas, you're hitting it with some type of instrument, ad sheriko v'nispashet v'nismalet b'kimoso. You're hammering it until it gets fixed, whatever the case may be. So Risech Kli, back in the Gemara, Rav Hamnuna wants to know, if you're repairing a Kli la'avodas kochavim mahu, so if you're repairing an avodas kochavim Kli, it was a Kli, then it got ruined, and then you repaired it. So asks the Gemara, and in such a Gemara way, what's the case? Avodas kochavim deman. Whose avodah zara was it? Ilema avodas kochavim dove kochavim. If you want to say that it's the pesel of a goy, Bain the Rabbi Shmuel, Bain the Rabbi Akiva, Misham Shevodas Kochavim Hain. Everyone would agree that this is a kli that serves. It's not the Avodah Zara itself, and therefore Misham Shevodas Kochavim Hain Asurun Ad Sheyavdu. Even according to Rabbi Akiva, even according to Rabbi Akiva, who says that the avodas kochavim of a goy is instantaneous. The second he builds it post-lo, he creates it. It's all instantly avodah zarah. But that's only true of the avodah zarah itself, not by the kalim that serve the avodah zarah. Everyone agrees in this case that it would be much. That can't be Rav Hamnuna's question. Pashut not. Says the Gemara Ve'ela. Maybe what you want to say is that avodas kochavim to Yisrael. You want to say that the idol belongs to a yid. Well, if that's true, aliba deman, aliba de Rabbi Ilema, aliba de Rabbi Akiva. If you want to say that the avodas kochavim belongs to a yid, hashda he gufa lo mitzra ad shete'avid, as we saw on the very where is this 4 lines into the wide lines, 6 lines into the wide lines. Once we know that Rabbi Akiva himself holds that the avodah zara of a Yisrael, the avodah zara itself doesn't turn into avodah zara until it's served. So misham shei, you're going to tell me about the tikroves, about the items that we use to worship it. Let's say there's an avodah zara of X, whatever it may be. So the Gemara says, you're going to tell me that Rabbi Akiva holds that the Avodah Zara is not yet Avodah Zara yet because it hasn't been served, but the Kalim are Avodah Pasha. That's not true. The Ella says the Gemara, Rav Hamnun is only asking his question about Risech Kli, Aliba de Rabbi Yishmael da Amar Asur Miyad. According to Rabbi Yishmael, who says that the Avodah Zara of a goy is Asura, of a yid is Asur Miyad, my. What would be the din of Risech? Would we say Mishamshin mi Mishamshin Gamrinan? We learn one shimush from another. Mahasam, just like by a goy, Ad Yabdu, it's not going to be usher until it's served. Avhacha Ad Yabdu, Odilma Gamar Mina. Or Odilma Mina Gamar, maybe we can learn it from the case itself. Mahi Asura, just like the Avodah Zara of a Jew is going to be Asur Miyad, Af Misham She Asur Miyad. So it says the Gemara, maybe that's the question of Rabbi Hamnuna. The Gemara pushes back on this. My area to come and boile risech. Why are we talking about risech? It should be kli ti boile. I saw that if a person makes a kli, forget about fixing a kli, even making a kli, the question should be true. Repairing the kli should be the next layer of questioning. Ask about the kli itself. So says the Gemara, you're right. Let's get version 2 of Rabbi Hamnuna to try and understand his question. Rabbi Hamnuna, mishum tuma yeshana kami boile. Hamnuna is not talking about fixing a kli. Rabbi Hamnuna is talking about Tuma Yeshana. Ditna. Clay matachos. You have metal kalim. Pshutein and mukablein. These are made out of metal, different shapes. If they're functional, they're tmein. Nishtabru. If they break, taru. If they break, they become tahor again. What if after they break, chazar ve'asan kalim, you fix them? Yachzur l'tuma yeshana. They go back to their initial tuma. V'hachi kame boile. This is the Gemara's question. That was a Mishnah, so that's really not subject to question. But what is subject to question? Ki hadra tuma. When we say that in regards to tuma status, not in regards to status of avodah zarah, but the status of tuma. When we say that you fix it and it becomes tamei again, do we say hanimili l'tuma deoraisa? That's only true when there's tuma deoraisa. Aval tuma derabanan lo o dilma loshna. Or perhaps would we say that by tuma derabanan that it would not return? Or loshna, does it not make a difference if it's tamei midrabanan or midoraisa? Says the Gemara. If that's true, if so, v'tiboyle sh'ar tumos derabanan. Why are you only asking about the tuma of avodah zara? L'chor, you can ask about any tuma. This isn't only about avodah zara. All tuma derabanan should be subject to this question of the Mishnah as to whether or not if it's repaired, the tuma comes back. So says the Gemara, you're right, but really there's a little bit more going on here. Chada. Migochada kami baile. It's one question built inside another, nestled inside another. The first question is Tuma derabanan mihadra olo. In general, the broader Tuma derabanan, would we say that if the kli was fixed, that the Tuma would return? And im tim selomar lo hadra. And if you want to say that in general, when it comes to general Tuma derabanan, that the Tuma status will not return if a kli broken was repaired. But maybe Tuma Davodas Kochavim is different. Mishum Chumra Davodas Kochavim. Mishavyu Rabbanan Ketuma Daraisolo. Teku. So the Gemara says, it's a beautiful question. Do we say in general that if something is tamei and is broken, is repaired, that the tuma comes back? And even if you want to say that it doesn't come back in general, but maybe avodah zarah is different because it's still chamor. That's what the Gemara wants to know. And teku tishbi ataretz pushios uvayos. We don't know the answer to this question. Four lines from the bottom on Beis Amud Aleph. Still have a ways to go. Yirtzeh Hashem will get to where I'd like to get to tonight, and I don't know how we're catching up, but we will at some point. The upcoming blot are very, very significant. If you've taken a look, this Amud is very significant, and we will Yirtzeh Hashem catch up by June of 2027. Says the Gemara, By Minei Rav Yochanan me Rav Yanai. Rav Yochanan asks a question from Rav Yanai. Tikroves avodas kochavim shel ochlen mahu. What about the tikrovis avodah zara that is food? Mimahanya lehu bitol taharinu mituma olo. Can we remove the tuma status of that food? Yes or no? Says the Gemara. Why are you talking about food? V'tiboyle kalim. Ask about kalim. Why are you talking about food? Food is overly specific. Talk about kalim. Says the Gemara. Kalim lo kami boyle. I'm not asking about kalim intentionally because kalim islu tar b'mikvah. Since I could always put a kli inside of a mikvah, tuma nami batla. Because when it comes to a kli, I can do that. I can't put food in a mikvah. That's not happening. So it says the Gemara, Ki kameboile ochlin. Says the Gemara, well, v'tiboile avodas kochavim gufa. Why don't you just ask about the avodah zara itself? Why are you talking about the food of the avodas kochavim? Says the Gemara, because as well, last line of Nun Beis Amud Aleph, avodas kochavim gufa lo miboile. That wasn't the problem either. Why? Because says the Gemara, kevan de isura batil, because a goy is able to remove the status of tumah, it can be mevatel, so tumah nami badla, and kikami boile tikrovas lavodas kocham shel ochlen mau. Let's say that a person had bread, and the bread was typically brought as the avodah zara. So that's our question. So says the Gemara. Here's how we might want to look at it. Here's our chakira of the question on Beis Amud Beis 3 lines down. Do we say kevan de isure lo batil kirav gidel? Do we say that since the isur of tikrovas avodah zara can't go away, like Rav Gidel told us, tumanami lo batla, that when it comes to the bread that was the item that was the service of the avodas kochavim, that since we can't get rid of its isur status, therefore we can't get rid of its tuma udilma isur doraisa lo batal. You're right; it still has an isur doraisa status of avodah zara, but tuma derabanan batal. But perhaps the chachamim were willing to be mavatal that if the avodah zara was gone, whatever the case is. And says the Gemara here as well, teku. We don't know the answer to this question either. We're on Nun Beis Amud Beis 6 lines down. Bamine Rabbi Yossi ben Shol, may Rebbe. So Rabbi Yossi ben Shol asks a question to Rabbi. Sheshim shubahan beveis Chonyo. Chonyo was the son of Shimon HaTzadik, and he actually built a bama. There was a big deal as to whether or not this was l'shem shamayim or if it was l'shem avodas kochavim. So the kalim that Chonyo used when he built a bama were those kalim mahu sheishtamshu bahen beveis hamikdash. If we had these kalim, could we use them in the Beis Hamikdash? He used kalim on a bama, and we don't know if it was l'shem avodas kochavim or l'shem shamayim. So it says the Gemara, well, first of all, let me solve half of your problem. First of all, Pasha, we're not talking about something that's used for avodah zarah. We're talking about Chonyo, who possibly was a good guy, and what he did is he built a bama and he used kalim, and the kalim that he used were used, and then we wanted to know, can we also bring them back and use them for? Can we also use them for the Beis Hamikdash? Ditnan, the Mishnah teaches us, Kohanim sheshimshu beveis Chonyo. The Kohanim who served in Beis Chonyo, they themselves, the adults, the men, the Kohanim who worshipped there, they were the priests, Lo Yeshamshu b'mikdash b'Yerushalayim. Ve'notzarach lomar l'davar acher. Pashat, that if had they served avodah zarah, that wouldn't be true. So what do we have over here? We see that the Kohanim were not allowed. And here's our question. Do we say Kohanim hu dekansinu rabbanon mishum de bnei deninu, that the Kohanim really shouldn't have been involved with this bama, and they shouldn't have been involved with Chonyo at all, and therefore they, who are bnei deya, they could have been the wiser. So then the Gemara says that perhaps we were makbid on them, and the Chachamim were kones them. However, abal kelim, but the utensils, they didn't have bechira. If Chonyo picked this metal bowl or that metal cup, nobody could. The cups can't talk. So perhaps we would say about kelim lo odilma lo shna. Would we say that just like the Chachamim were kones, the Chachamim, that if they served in Beis Chonyo, they can't be used in the Beis Hamikdash, and so too the kelim? Or no, would we distinguish between the Kohanim who are people and Bnei Deah and the kelim who are not Bnei Deah? So Amar Le, the Gemara responds, Asur mein, they're Asur, even the Kalim are Asur. Umikra haya bi'adenu ushechachnuhu. So this is Rebbe talking, that Rebbe had said, because if you look back up at the Teku, right after Teku on the 6th line, Rebbe Yossi ben Shal was asking a question from Rebbe about the Kalim of Beis Chonyo. So Amar Le, Rebbe said, Asur and they're not allowed. There was a pasuk, said Rebbe, but I forgot what pasuk it is. So, it's very comforting that that Rebbe forgot something. Makes me feel a little bit better. So says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Esve, the person that asked the Shaila, Rabbi Yossi ben Shal, pushes back and says, I know what pasuk you're talking about. He says, Kol ha'kelim asher hizniach hamelech achaz b'malchusa b'malo hechanu v'hikdashnu. That all of the things that Achaz did, who was a bad guy, we prepared and we re-sanctified the kelim that he used. Ma'elav hechanu da'at v'linhu. That when the pasuk says that they toveled them and hikdashnu da'akdishinanhu, that we reinstituted them in the Beis Hamikdash. So perhaps, Rebbe, the pasuk that you're remembering is a pasuk that would be a kula, not a heter, that we should allow the kelim. Says the Gemara, Amar Le. Rebbe says back to Rav Yossi ben Shol, Baruch atah l'shamayim shechzarta li'avedasi. You returned me my lost item. That was the pasuk I couldn't remember. Thank you very much. You brought me back the pasuk, but you learned it wrong. You learned the pasuk wrong. Let me show you how to properly learn the pasuk. Echanu she'genazum. When it says they prepared them, what that means, they prepared for the new Beis Hamikdash by burying the old Kalim from Achaz, because Achaz was not a good guy. V'ikdashnu, what does that mean? Sheikdashnu acherem tachtem. Then we got new Kalim. We went to the store, we made them from scratch, whatever we did. And therefore, Rebbe was of the opinion with Amar Makom that we are not allowed to use the Kalim from Beis Chonyo. The Gemara says almost halfway down on Nun Beis Mid Beis, maybe we have a Marimakum that supports what we just learned. Bizrachis Tzfonis, in the northeast corner of the Azara, Ba Ganzu Beis Chashmonais Avnei HaMizbech Sheshaksu Avnei Anshe Yavan, that when the Greeks violated the Beis HaMikdash, so when it came to the stones of the Mizbeach, they were put into a side room in one of the 4 corners of the Azara. You've seen the pictures where in each corner of the Azara there was another room. And in one of those rooms, they stored the stones from the Mizbech that the Yevanim had violated, and they stored. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Sheshes, Sheshaksu la'avodas kochavim. They put them on the side because of avodas kochavim. That's what the Gemara says. And this was really not a Tuma Deoraisa, because Yavan actually didn't own them, and we have a principle of Ein Adam Oser Davar She'enu Shalom. So really, they were only Tamei Midrabanan. And therefore, we see that something that's Tamei Midrabanan has been sidelined. It's been put into one of these 4 rooms in the Mizrachis Tzfonis, in the Mizrachis Tzfonis, in the Mizrachis Tzfonis in the northeast corner. So Amar Papa, no, Hasam Kra Ashkach V'Darsha. There, in regards to what happened by Yavan, there was a pasuk that was darshan that motivated them to do what they did, to put the stones of the Mizbeach over there. There, based on the pasuk, it seems to be that they profaned the Mizbech. It seems to be that they lowered the status into a din d'Rabbanan. Amrei hechi navid. So they said, what should we do? The Chashmonaim said, what should we do with the stones? If we say nisbarinhu, that we should break them in order to remove their tumah status, that can't be, because if we ever want to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, avanim shleimos amarachmana, that we need to have full stones. The Mizbeach can't be made from stones that are broken. If you want to say nenasrinhu, that we should shave them down, lo sanif alein barzel amarachmana, we know that we use the shamir, the worm, this seemingly miraculous worm. There were those who did the research on this worm. They found out that after it would defecate, some of the acid was able to burn through stone, or it was an ace. You can call it whatever you want, but it worked. But over here, lo sanif alein barzel amarachmana, so that can't be. Then the Gemara says, "Ve'amai, why then did the Chashmonaim hide them?" So says the Gemara, after all, what they could have done is lisbarinu. They should have broken them, and granted, you can't use them for the Mizbeach, but they should have then taken it for themselves. Once it's broken, and it's no longer Kaddish anymore, the tumas, it's already Tameh, so it can't be used for the Mizbeach, just break them and use them. Milo Amar Rav Oshaya Bikshu Lignos Kol Kesef Zav Shebaolam. Rav Oshaya said that what the Chachamim wanted to do is they wanted to say that all of the gold and silver in the world should not be used, mishum tekasba v'davel shel Yerushalayim, because once our enemies pillaged the Beis Hamikdash and took gold and silver, we didn't know, if when we went to the pawn shop down the street, that when we were going to buy gold and silver, we didn't know that it wasn't from the Beis Hamikdash. Should be usher to use that. That's hektish. That's mamash kodesh. You're not allowed to use that. But when we analyze this, it's very odd. Why would Rav Oshaya say that you can't use any gold and silver? Yerushalayim havia ruba de alma. We have a halachic principle. Kol de parish meruba parish. If you find something and you're not sure what its status is, and there are a lot of exceptions to this. This is Hilchos Ta'arubes that's found in Shulchan Aruch. But one way or the other, if you're not sure where something comes from, we say call the parish, meruba parish. Let's say a woman calls and says, I'd like to do a bris, and she doesn't identify if she's a yid or not. She's a goy. Call the parish, meruba parish. We assume that she's a goy. Okay, I would inquire, but if I wasn't going to inquire, I have to assume that she's not a yid. Of course, we always ask. Rabbi first gave me a givaldik psak by Brissim. He said, you can't ask a woman, are you Jewish? Because she has no problem lying to you. She might know that there are chilukei deos over there about whether you're going to make a bracha. Sometimes they know because their friends talk. Tell me about your Jewish childhood. Tell me about your bubby. Tell me about your mother. Did they light candles in your house when you have to get more context. It's not enough information just to say, are you a yid? Which is a fascinating psak. He said this to me about 5 years ago. Alachas kama v'kama kal v'chomer ben benoshel kal v'chomer. It's even worse now because I know people are lying to me because I've been lied to before. Where people say, yeah, no, of course I'm Jewish, of course. So now I say, like, oh, are you born to a woman who's Jewish? Oh, tell me about your bubby. Tell me about your mother so that I can get a little bit more mamashas, meat on the bone to know if they're actually taka Jew. And many times it's happened where they're like, well, I'm Jewish, but my mother converted. Oh, are you Jewish now? Let's talk about that, It's not so simple. So says the Gemara, Yerushalayim, Havi Ruba Alma, first of the long lines on Nun Beis and Mid Beis, and says the Gemara, why would you assume that all the gold and silver is going to be usher? Most of the gold came from Yerushalayim. No, not most of the gold. That's not true. Alamar Abaye Bikshu Lignos, what they wanted to be, what this brisa means when it said that they were being mevakesh to hide the gold was dinra, their coins of Hadrena and Tuina. These are different people. It looks like Hadrian. Does it say Hadrian in the art scroll here? On the first of the long lines here, it says Alamar Abai Bikshu Lignos Dinra of Hadrena Turiana. Does anyone see that there? You have it?
Yeah.
It says Hadrian?
Yeah.
And what's the next name in English? Turiana? How does it spelled?
Trajam.
Oh. Troin?
Trajam.
Jan?
Yes.
Oh, I don't know who that is. Hadrian is a name we're familiar with. Anyways, perhaps they were mevakesh. Rav Oshaya was mevakesh not to be gones those coins, even shifa, even though they were worn down. We have nativ Yerushalayim because of the coins of Yerushalayim. Until we found the pasuk state in Chumash that says that it's allowed to use those coins, even from Hadrian, even from Hadrina and Turina. It says, what's the pasuk? So what do we see from over there? We see that those coins are allowed, that they were mechulal. And if they were mechulal, the same should be true with the stones, that we should be allowed to break the avnei hamizbech and we should be able to use them. Just like the Gemara said. Why did the Chashmonaim feel the need to hide the avnei hamizbech? Once they lost their status, they lost their status. Break them and give them out. Go make a cobblestone road. They're mutter, just like the coins were mutter from Hadrian. So the Gemara gives a very important hashkafa answer. It's a halacha answer, but we can't lose focus of the importance here. It's the answer of pasnisht. It's not appropriate. Says the Gemara, Hasam, we're 3 lines into the wide lines. Hasam, by the gold coins, where we were matir the use of these coins, even of Hadriana and Turaina, that's because Luish Tam Shabuhu Gvoa. Those coins were never used for the Gavoa. They were never used for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But Hacha, by the Mizbeach, how many korbanos were consumed on that Mizbeach? Keban de Ishtamesh Buhu Gvoa, Lav Orach Ara Lishtamushe Buhu Edyota. It's not right to use it for a regular need. That's not the right way to use the stones of the Mizbech. You should not be doing that. It's pasnisht. Might be mutter, but it's pasnisht. It's not the right thing to do. Yeah.
The Roman emperor who ruled from 98 to 117 AD, widely considered one of Rome's greatest conquerors.
That's post-Churban. The Beis HaMikdash was destroyed in around 70 of the Common Era. He was post-Churban. That's fascinating. Okay, so they had some coinage then. And where were we at that time? That's still times of the Tanoim. And Rav Oshaya is an Amora. So Rav Oshaya was quoting about a halacha that he had heard a generation or two before. He was an early Amor. Beautiful, thank you. All right, that brings us to a new Mishnah. Let's continue learning. We're going to be stopping at the Mishnah at the top of Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. I would love to do more, but I didn't have time to prepare more. Says the Gemara. I have no idea. I'm not sure. Thunder. It says the Gemara, Ove kochavim mevatel avodas kochavim shelo v'shel chaveru. A goy is, as we know, allowed to be mevatel his own avodas kochavim, his own pesel. But here's a chiddush of the Mishnah, not just his, but v'shel chaveru. That's a chiddush because it's not even his, but a goy is allowed to do that. The Yisrael, and this is a din we saw on the previous page of his son Basaser. The Yisrael ein mevatel avodas kochavim shel oved kochavim. A Yisrael is not allowed to be mevatel a goy's oved kochavim. That's din number 1 of the Mishnah, 1 and 2. Next, ha-mevatel avodas kochavim. When one is in fact mevatel a pesel, when a goy is mevatel a pesel, automatically mevatel mishamshe. So let's say that you had the Avodah Zara itself and you had 10 kalim that were there to serve the Avodah Zara, the Mishamsh. Once the guy is mevatel the Avodah Zara itself, it's automatically mevatel all of the kalim that were there to serve the Beis HaMikdash. But the reverse is not true. Bitel Mishamsheha, if the guy is mevatel the kalim that were used, the 10 kalim, but only Mishamsh and Mutter, only those kalim become Mutter, but he asura. That doesn't undo the Avodah Zara. So it's only one directional. The Avodah Zara, if you're nullified, then all the kalim are fine. But if you nullify the kalim, the Avodah Zara is still Avodah Zara. Says the Gemara, Masni la Rebbe, l'Reb Shimon, let's get the correction here, l'Reb Shimon Bere. So we know Reb Shimon was the son of Rebbe. And Rebbe says to his son, father-son learning on Shabbos afternoon, Oved kochavim mevatel avodas kochavim shel v'shel chaber, the same exact din of our Mishnah. Not surprising at all, considering that Rebbe redacted our Mishnayos. So the Gemara says that Rebbe is true to form. He says that in avodas kochavim, he can be mevatel his own avodas kochavim as well as that of a friend. Amar le, Reb Shimon, the son of Rebbe, says back to him, Rebbe, which is fascinating. He didn't call him Tati, he didn't call him Abba, he called him Rebbe. I don't know what the halachos are in such a case. When your father is your Rebbe, do you call your father Rebbe or do you call him Tati? Don't know. I don't think the Gemara says anything about this. No. Anyways, Reb Shimon says to his father, to Rebbe, he says, Rebbe, Shanis lanu bi'alduscha, you taught us something different when you were younger. So let's say the father-son had been learning for a couple of decades. 20 years ago, he taught X. Today, he's teaching Y. Oved kochavim mevatel avodas kochavim shelo v'shel Yisrael. The Gemara says that an oved kochavim can cancel his own avodas kochavim and not that of another goy, but v'shel Yisrael. A Yisrael is never allowed to be mevatel his own avodah zara. But what Reb Shimon was saying is that his father, when he was younger, had taught that the din is that when a goy is mevatel his own avodah zara, that's no problem. He can also be mevatel that of a Jew, which is a shtickle chiddush. Says the Gemara, to Yisrael mika mevatla. How can you say that the avodah zara of a Jew could ever be mevatel even by a goy? After all, v'sam basaser ksiv. So here we're going to see the Meimer of Hillel Berei de Rebbe Vals. And I just want to say out loud that we're going to see 3 versions of this Memra. We're not sure where it was taught, which is one of the confusing parts of learning sometimes, that when a Memra says, Ika demasni la'aha, Ika demasni la'aha. So we're going to learn the answer to this question first. Question number 1 is, how could it be that according to Rebbe's earlier version of his statement, the one that Reb Shimon said he heard when he was a young boy, how could it be that a goy could be mevatel the avodas kochavim of Yisrael? The Gemara says in the name of Reb Hillel Berei, the Rebbe Valas, lo nitzricha, sheyesh lo ba shutfes. The goy and the yid, they had a partnership in the shutfes. If they didn't have a partnership, and the goy who did not own the avodah zara that I own, then pashut he cannot be mevatel mine. When can a goy be mevatel the avodah zara of a yid? That's only true if you and I have a partnership together. You're the goy and I'm the yid, and we own the avodah zara of X, whatever. Then the goy can do it. But stam, of course, he cannot. Pasha, the Torah says you're not allowed to do that. So now we have these two approaches of Rebbe. One is that an Oved Kochavim can be mevatel his own Avodah Zara and that of another goy. And the earlier version of Rebbe was that not only can an Oved Kochavim be mevatel his own Avodah Zara, but it can be mevatel that of a Yid. So says the Gemara, V'yaldusa my kosavar, uv'ziknusa my kosavar. What were the respective mindsets of Rebbe? The first, when he was younger, when he said that a goy can be mevatel the avodah zara of a yid, and the second, where he said, the later version, where he said that he can be mevatel the avodah zara only of a goy. Says the Gemara as follows: V'yaldusa, when Rebbe was younger, savar, what did he hold? Yisrael adaita de'oved kochavim palach. When a Jew is doing avodah zara, he's not doing it because he wants to. He believes that in the goy. He doesn't believe in the deity because the goy is social pressure. He's doing it because of the goy. And once the avodas kochavim, once the oved kochavim is mevatel his avodas kochavim, so then the Yisrael namim mevatla, because the guy wasn't really bought in. There was no theology or philosophy behind the avodah zarah of the guy. He's only doing it because the guy did it, and because of that, he didn't really sink his teeth into it. So then, when the guy is doing bittul, he can also be mevatel that of the Yisrael. However, uviziknuso savar, with 3 lines from the bottom of Nun Beis Mid Beis, in his old age, when he was more machmir, and he wouldn't allow the guy to be mevatel the avodah zarah of a Yisrael, he changed his tune. Instead of saying like he did when he was younger that the Yisrael, when he served the avodas kochavim, was only because of the guy. Now, when he's older, what does he say? Yisrael adaita den avshei palach. He said things have changed. Our culture has changed. Now, when a yid does avodah zarah, he's doing it because he actually believes in it, and therefore ki Yisrael, and therefore ki mevatel oved kochavim den avshei di Yisrael lo batil. So this was what Reb Shimon did. He caught his father red-handed. His father explained, you're right. When I was younger, the culture was that when a Jew would do avodah zarah, it was only out of social pressure. He didn't actually believe in the philosophy. He couldn't spit it back to you. He couldn't even make it up. But I'm seeing a change. I'm seeing a change. Now when people do avodah zarah, they're doing so l'shem the avodah zarah proper, not because of the guy, but because they believe in the avodah zarah. This gets into a fascinating area of psak, where when realities change, halacha changes. If a Rav gives a psak in his youth because a certain reality was true at a particular time, no problem. No problem. That was the psak then. But because times have changed and people are different, so therefore the psak changes. And that's something that a Rav has to be agile. They have to be flexible. They have to be with it. They have to know what's going on. I'll just give a simple example. Let's say that there was a culture where women never wore pants, right? So when we talk about that a woman should not wear kligever, she shouldn't wear the clothing of a man. So in a culture where skirts are exclusive to women and pants are exclusive to men, so then in that culture, for a man to wear pants would be very problematic. But today, women wear pants all the time, probably more than they wear, not at work necessarily, but probably more than they wear skirts. So now to say that there's an isser for a woman to wear pants, that's not necessarily true. It's no longer exclusively that of a man. So that would be a dogma of where when society changes, the psak changes. Our principles don't change, but the application of halacha definitely changes. All of that was version 1 of Reb Hillel Bereder Rav Valas, who can be found 6 lines from the bottom. But it's possible that he wasn't commenting on this case of Rebbe. We're now 2 lines from the bottom of the page. Some say that Reb Hillel Bereder Rav Valas was actually talking about something else. What line was he talking about? Yisrael einu mevatel avodas kochavim shel avodas kochavim, that a Jew cannot nullify the idol of a goy. Says the Gemara Pshita. That should be obvious. How does Reb Hillel Bereder Rabbi Valas responds as Gemara Amar Rabbi Rabbi Valas, turning to the top of Nun Gimel Amar Aleph, no nitzrucha sheish bo b'shutvus. No, maybe they were partners, and maybe the Jew was trying to cancel that of the guys. V'kamash malan Yisrael hu delo mevatel dovid kolchavim v'lovid kolchavim den afshei mevatel. A guy, even if he's a shutuf, even if he's a partner, he's not allowed to cancel a guy's avodah zarah. And for the third version of how to understand Reb Shimon, how to understand Reb Hillel Bereder Rav Alis, where 4 lines down on Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, says the Gemara, Ika Damasna La Braisa. Some say that this memra of Reb Hillel Bereder Rav Alis was talking about neither of these, but rather a Braisa. Reb Shimon ben Menashe Omer Avodas Kochavim Shel Yisrael. If there is an idol that belongs to a Jew, Ein Labatela Olamis. You're never allowed to be Mavatel. So let's say I buy this statue from a store, it's an Aztecian and God, and I all of a sudden I decided that that's the new deity. So ein la betela olamis, you could never nullify. Says the Gemara, my olamis. What does olamis mean? So Amar Reb Hillel, Reder Rav Alis, lo nitzucha ela sheyesh lo oved kochavim ba shutvis. That there we're talking about a shutvis, and that Aztecian God that I bought. And I, lowercase g, I bought this Aztecian God, and me and the Goy are a shutef in this. I own 50%, he owns 50%. What this comes to teach you is that, like the latter version of Rebbe that we saw on the bottom of Nun Beis Amud Beis, that a Yid, when he does Avodah Zara, it's because he wants to do Avodah Zara. And therefore the Goy cannot be Mavatal his part, and therefore, Ein Labatela Olamis. We'll stop right here at the Mishnah, and Emir Hashem pick up tomorrow night with yet another Mishnah and another Daf. Wishing you all a beautiful night.